illusion, physical and subjective reality. It creates an illusion of physical and subjective reality, where if someone really wanted to have sex with them, they would not require restrictions to be placed. Objectification creates an illusion, where another does not wish to make children with them, but acts like they do, e.g. presents themselves as a sexual object, or indicates to them that they are a sexual object. All forms of objectification are based on the imaginary. It is easier to objectify another when one is not with them, when one is in darkness, when one is sick, when one is tired, indicating that the process of objectification relies upon illusion. It is easier to objectify oneself and others when one is alone, without direct confirmation of the subjective significance of oneself or others by theirs. By others. Objectification relies upon the unreal or imaginary, and without this it has no power of attraction. In a state of acceptance of objectification, it doesn't matter which object they have, and so multiple partners, even the inclusion of imaginary ones, becomes acceptable. Males and females subconsciously want to have babies, but babies are not objects, and neither are their partners objects, and so objectification is not helpful. An imaginary person is not a suitable candidate for a partner or parent, e.g. dream. Illusions do not last. One's susceptibility to the reality communicated by objectification is dependent upon one's family circumstances during development, parental relationships, age, number and sex of siblings, and one's present relationships. All desire to objectify is based upon the imaginary. It may involve reflecting upon a previous situation where these thoughts mismatch reality. We need to subjectify others to prevent us from being susceptible to illusion by being in another's company, direct confirmation of the subjective significance of oneself or others by another, experiencing stories, myth. Even though the physical reality presented may be imaginary, it is believed that there could be a person out there who could have experienced what they experienced, or acted the way they acted in similar circumstances, reminding us of subjective significance. Prayer, subjectifying others including the dead, watching videos, reading books, working, etc. Being in love is accepting a perceived need to subjectify someone completely, although not necessarily exclusively. One would do anything for them. Falling in love, a crush, is accepting a perceived need to subjectify someone exclusively. One does everything for them, honours their subjective significance in a special way. This perceived need may develop for a variety of reasons. One might be so physically attracted, e.g. seduced, by another that one has to love them, not to objectify them, use them. One might have difficulty dealing with the desire to objectify in general and realise that they need to subjectify someone in order to operate well in society, where they believe another is the best candidate for this choice because they like them, are physically attracted to them, but do not want to objectify them. They might feel it is best for one and another to be together, an appropriate response to mutual like. One may even accept a servitude role in acceptance of this perceived need. The objectification of oneself or another, or the acceptance of objectification of oneself or another, is the perversion of truth. Truth, perverse, perversion, pervert, etc. Objectification may involve the creation of a scene, such as in an act or media presentation, in which an individual both objectifies oneself and is perceived to be looking into the viewer's eyes. In the case of an act, under the false assumption the objectified cares for and understands them, that this presents an unrealistic scenarios to the viewer. This is an impossible experience. In the case of a media presentation, the scenario presented is almost guaranteed to be unrealistic, an impossible experience, as the objectified does not have to be looking at anyone to create the scene, and would never want to replicate the scenario for the viewer in reality, even if they didn't want to care for the viewer, they didn't care for them or understand them. Objectification may involve the creation of scenes such as in an act or media presentation in which an individual objectifies oneself while looking away from the viewer, or hides their face, whether by positioning of a hat or otherwise. This may present a realistic scenario to the viewer, a possible experience, in the case that, under active avoidance of knowledge, the objectified desires, or would ever desire to objectify themselves wholly for the viewer. In the case of a media presentation, however, the scenario presented is almost guaranteed to be unrealistic, an impossible experience, as the objectified does not in fact have to be looking away from anyone to create the scene, and would never want to replicate the scenario for the viewer in reality, even if they didn't care for the viewer or understand them. Objectification may involve the creation of a scene such as an act or media presentation in which an individual objectifies themselves while looking away from the viewer, even showing some acceptance of or internal influence by objectification, which may be used to create the impression that the individual does not care for the viewer, confirming the illusion that the individual has no subjective significance. Objectification may involve the creation of a scene such as an act or media presentation in which an individual objectifies themselves while looking away from the viewer, even indignantly or with pride, which may be used to create the impression that the individual does not care for the viewer, creating the illusion that the viewer has no subjective significance, and should therefore accept the objectification as presented. One's intent, modest or immodest, can be seen in their eyes, so any attempt to objectify a good person will fail. Unnatural enhancements to the body, adjustments in size, shape, hair, etc., are not necessarily attractive for physical reasons, e.g. illusion of fertility, but are always attractive for psychological reasons. They communicate a process of presenting as an object, objectification, and the desire to be involved in this process. Objectification in the media may be achieved by graphical touch-up, where these unnatural enhancements to the body are not necessarily attractive for physical reasons, but are always attractive for psychological reasons. They have been presented as an object. It is arguably the ultimate form of beauty, and it must be distributed lest it go to waste on a single being. Tolerance of objectification increases the activity of horror in the media, because it is an extremely effective method of revealing the elusive nature of objectification. May be used to create and/or invoke conscious fantasy for the purposes of giving pleasure to the viewer as product of subconscious acceptance of the imaginary scenario involving a beautiful person's desire for and compliance in a sexual act with them. May be used to create and/or invoke conscious fantasy for the purposes of provoking the viewer into giving pleasure to another on an imaginary basis. May be used to create and/or provoke conscious fantasy for the purposes of giving pleasure to the viewer as product of subconscious acceptance of the imaginary scenario involving a powerful, dominant, famous person objectifying them. People seek the union of a beautiful object and subject in their ideal partner, and no lasting relationship can exist without either of these, e.g. virginity. Ultimately, all we need is an answer to the question, do you love me? Objectification can only distort one's ability to obtain a real answer to this question. The heightening experience of being in a relationship or having a subject is in itself the prerequisite for a lasting relationship, e.g. marriage, where it becomes a necessity and not just a highlight. A person is not attracted to an objectified person if they know that the objectified desires a relationship with someone else. People seek to be desired as the union of a beautiful object and subject. Although we desire or to be a beautiful object, objectification negates the beauty of the subject. No relationship can be sustained without either true love or mutual objectification. The opposite of love is objectification, to use. It can make travel more attractive, to experience one's own subjective significance through welcoming. Objectification makes us appreciate everything good, loving in life, by making everything else bad, fail in comparison. Objectification is and will always be the opposite of love, and as such, any love believed to come from it will be warped. The feeling of honour experienced is enhanced when interacting with a non-objectified subject. People desire conscious commitment by another, and the process of objectification, the corruption of this desire by base instinct, does not operate without this, or belief in this. To fulfill our own desire for isolated pleasure, acceptance of objectification, we require our partner to accept this desire also. In order to give someone something they appreciate, they need to be thought of something more than just something which desires pleasure, an object without subjective significance. Can allow humans to separate the action of sex from any necessary implication of pregnancy or child generation, allowing them to have children when they think they would like to or are ready to have children. Some forms of objectification can reduce abortion rates. Other forms of objectification can increase abortion rates. Some forms of objectification can prevent the transmission of STDs. Other forms can increase the transmission of STDs. It can be argued that in retrospect, no human being is ever ready to have a particular child or can comprehend what having a particular child would be like, and as a consequence their ability to reason the exact timing of when it is best to have a new child is limited. Children will not appreciate having been objectified, accident or planned, where the subjective significance can neither be accident or planned by their parents. Objectification may involve verbalizing constraints on parenthood in a sexualized relationship, where the only integrated answer to the question of children is provided in the details of the sexual act itself. It creates a strong possibility that a child will be born that was not wanted during the time of its conception. Those being sold the half-truth of objectification are themselves being objectified. The objectified do not want people looking at their face, or use hand-body movements to redirect another's eyes. Those who have been objectified or offended by objectification will often tease others to ensure that they imitate their response, generally materialized as a form of impressionism. Those who have been swayed into an acceptance of objectification will often tease others to ensure that they imitate their response, generally materialized as a form of impressionism also. An experience of the acceptance of objectification results in the subconscious acceptance of objectification, the natural state of mind. An experience of objectification may be so shocking that it creates an extreme divergence between conscious and subconscious desire. An experience of objectification or an experience of the acceptance of objectification may result in subconscious misassociation, e.g. between one's body and another person. Being objectified makes one subconscious liable to objectify others. Objectification of others helps us deal with pain, our own objectification. Objectification of the opposite sex helps us to deal with the objectification of our own sex. It helps us to deal with other things in life for which we have no solution. Too many issues within society interconnected, and to eliminate one in isolation is possibly difficult, if not impossible. It is cyclical. People who have been hurt often seek to reduce the impact of their experience by spreading or justifying objectification. Tolerance of objectification is often used by people as a means to pay back those who have hurt them, lied to them by misrepresenting their intentions through, for example, apparent self-objectification. It is not until we have experienced the subjective significance of another person that we are able to properly deal with their objectification. It is also not until we have experienced the subjective significance of ourselves that we are able to properly deal with our own objectification.